This morning, the New York Times put out an article essentially trying to convince people why now is a better time to rent than buy. I want to go through their article and show you their arguments and explain why it always makes sense to get into home ownership. It does depend on your situation, but their reasoning for renting over buying just doesn't really add up. Their first argument is that it's okay to rent. They say that when house prices are high, as they are in most parts of the US, buying often wastes more money because of broker's fees, mortgage interest, house repairs, and other costs of owning. They say that at this time, in the majority of circumstances, renting likely makes more economic sense than buying. My initial response to this is that yes, house prices are higher than they were, and they will likely continue to go up over time. The fact that home values have the high probability of maintaining and increasing value over time are one of the big reasons for home ownership. If you buy a property, that asset will have a high probability to continue to appreciate over time. They state that buying often wastes more money because of broker's fees, mortgage interest, house repairs, and other costs of owning. First off, when you're buying a property, you yourself will likely not have to pay for your realtor in order for them to represent you throughout the process. Typically, the buyer's agent, the realtor that is representing you, the buyer, is paid out of the seller's listing commissions. So as a buyer, in most cases, you can have a realtor represent you and you're not paying your agent a dollar out of pocket. Their next point is that you're wasting money on mortgage interest. When you're paying a mortgage, yes, you do pay the mortgage interest as a part of that loan. The other part of the mortgage payment is buying down that principal or the original loan amount that you used to purchase the property. So as a part of your mortgage payment, you are paying the principal loan balance down while also paying some mortgage interest. When you are renting, you are paying your landlord's mortgage for them. You get zero benefit out of paying that rent. I also mentioned house repairs and other costs of owning. Depending on the property that you're buying, if it's relatively new or if it's older, there may be costs associated with repairs, but there's also costs associated with renting. Their second argument is that with changes in the tax code, it's not as beneficial to have that mortgage interest write-off as a tax deduction. I'll save this conversation for you and your accountant, but the deduction is a smaller reason to be purchasing a home, so it's definitely not going to be as big of an argument for arguing against buying a house. They then state a break-even mortgage rate that would make buying or renting more affordable, and that in many situations, the break-even rate is between 4 and 5%. So they're stating more so that rates need to be within a certain range in order for it to make sense to buy a home. It's more so about how long you plan to be in the property for, how long you plan to own the property for. There's no such thing as a break-even mortgage rate. There is a break-even time period. And if you go into the home buying process looking at it like the long-term investment that it is, then you can go into the details of how long you need to live in the property for and where that break-even time period is for you. They say that buying will still make sense for some families, and they list out a few different areas to where home values are still relatively lower compared to other high-cost areas. They say for people who are tempted to buy, look at new construction. Ultimately, when looking at trying to time the real estate market, the best time to purchase a home is today. The second best time to buy a home is yesterday. Home prices realistically will continue to appreciate over time no matter what interest rates do, and especially if and when mortgage interest rates drop from where they are today, that many more people will be able to enter the market, be able to qualify for more for a loan amount, which means higher purchase prices, which means that values will only continue to appreciate more. The New York Times then links this rent versus buy calculator, and their big headline is that renting saves you $133,000 over 10 years. And if you click on that link, this is the scenario that they go through. They assume that you're buying a $500,000 house, that your rent would be $2,000 per month if you were to rent, that you plan to stay in that property for 10 years, that the mortgage rate is 7.25, the down payment percentage is 20%. It'd be a 30-year mortgage, there would be no PMI. They then assume that home values would continue to appreciate by 3%, that rents would also go up by 3%, and that instead of the down payment, the 20% down that you would use to buy the home, that you would take all of that money and instead invest that in the stock market, and that you would get 4.5% per year for those 10 years. They also assume the inflation rate will be at 3%. They assume a certain amount of property taxes, your tax rate. They then assume 4% of closing costs and 6% to sell your home down the road. They also assume a certain amount of maintenance fees, homeowners insurance, utilities, and extra. I then reduced the down payment to a more conservative 5% down payment instead of 20%, and this calculator gets you to saving $149,000 over 10 years to rent versus buy. However, going to a calculator that I believe is a bit more accurate looking specifically in Clark County, Washington at a $500,000 purchase price. With these same numbers of a $500,000 sales price, 5% down, some of these numbers are updated, which I believe are more accurate. A forecasted appreciation with the housing market of 4.53%. The annual rental increase would be 4.375%. This is even using a higher interest rate at 7.5%. This scenario states that for the same scenario, if you were to purchase the property, 10 years later sell it, you would net $166,000 to own the property versus renting. And here is why. Over those 10 years, you're going to have the appreciation gain on the value of the property, with home values continuing to go up about 4.5% per year. The historical average is even higher than that at 5%. So after those 9 years, the value of that $500,000 property that you bought today would be about $745,000. The amortization gain that you would have down the road would be about $54,000. That's the amount that you pay down the initial loan balance by making your mortgage payment each month. Instead of making your rent payment, which is paying down your landlord's mortgage, you would be paying more out of pocket technically in order to own versus rent, about $98,000 over those 10 years. They also assume that there's some purchase closing costs when you initially bought the property, about $10,000. There are the costs to sell down the road, which is that 6% of the $745,000 value, so that's $44,000. And then there's that estimated tax benefit over renting, about $19,000. So in total, your estimated cash flow would be about $98,000 more in order to buy versus rent. However, down the road, when you do sell that property, when you factor in the amount of appreciation, the amortization gain, the overall equity you have in that property from making those mortgage payments and from the appreciation in the housing market, subtract out the cash flow difference, subtract out all of the costs that it would take to buy the home, to sell the home, and you're still netting well into the six figures because you decided to buy versus rent. Now, of course, in this scenario, it doesn't factor in that you might be investing that cash flow difference over the 10-year period into the stock market, but there's really no guarantees of how much you would be making in the stock market over that time period. But realistically, investing in real estate in your principal residence will be the most stable investment that you'll make over the long term. But of course, whether it will make more sense for you to buy versus rent in this very moment will be on a case-by-case basis. Make sure to reach out if you have any questions or if you'd like to talk through your situation. My information will be in the description of this video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are a first-time home buyer that would like to learn more about the home buying process from start to finish, make sure to check out this video right here.